A lot of people play Elden Ring to have these big, extravagant boss fights, rightfully so, but what about all the other enemies you come across in the lands between? Here are some of the weirdest mobs in Elden Ring. You ever have a friend or know someone that was just way too happy all the time to the point where it kind of got annoying? That's what the Celebrants remind us of. Constantly dancing and being festive even when there is absolutely nothing to celebrate. They are innately harmless. However, if you decide to interrupt their pirouetting, there will be a price to pay. They do not, I repeat, do not take kindly to you interrupting their dance moves. This humanoid creature is the hybrid of a giant bat and a grandma that just loves to sing. Already sounds pretty weird, doesn't it? And while most grandmas are adorable, this one is not, and it's not even close. With its sunken-in abdomen, that is a clear sign of this creature being hangry, especially when it decides it wants to screech at you. They also seem to have some sort of headdress. Not sure what the purpose is, but it definitely adds to the weirdness. They're also incredibly annoying because they are a flying creature, and flying creatures in games like this just seem like they give you the most trouble possible. These juvenile scholars are the key to phase 1 of the Renala boss fight, with an entire group of them staring right at you, some of them laughing at you, some of them singing at you, some of them blowing flames at you, and I think some of them calling you stupid by constantly hurling books at you, maybe hoping that you'll soak in some information as they smack you on the side of the head. They move around by using their hands to drag them forward on their belly. Couple that with the strange robe and hats they all wear, and you've got yourself a recipe for weird. And also, during the boss fight, when Renala is constantly calling upon her Sweetings, it's just weird. Shrimp that know how to walk upright and use a massive blade is the best way to quickly summarize this creature. They have long, lanky appendages mixed in with short, thin ones that line this character's body that is also protected by a shell on the backside. Makes sense since it's a shrimp, right? They also have the ability to shoot some kind of web-like projectile that tracks you like a heat-seeking missile. A murderous, scary shrimp. This kind of thing can truly only happen in Elden Ring. Just a bunch of hard-working miners that are minding their business, trying to do their job until these Tarnished have to come through and ruin all of that to get those precious smithing stones. These miners look as if they haven't had a lunch break in over a decade, being incredibly malnourished and, like you'd imagine, incredibly dirty. The work they do down there isn't the most glamorous, but it is an honest living. And unfortunately for them, I wouldn't imagine that they would be very happy that they made it on this list, but they are a weird enemy type and they do have their rightful place on this list. We're truthfully not sure where to begin on describing this one. It's just a nasty, disgusting blob of gelatinous remains from deceased creatures and skeletons, and is somehow able to move about similar to how a slug would. And while the only bone structure these creatures have are the bones that are protruding out from whatever you want to call this gelatinous blob, it does somehow form a way to make some kind of attack. So they're not fun to look at, they're not fun to be around, which is exactly why they are on this list. These creatures are undeniably weird, but hear me out, also kind of cute, but in a weird way, right? With their dumpy heads and emotionless black eyes, they somewhat resemble a human frog hybrid. But don't let their arched back, big bellies, and skinny limbs fool you, because these creatures are surprisingly athletic. I mean, just look at this thing cartwheel. It's an anomaly. The fact that it can look the way that it looks but still have that kind of nimbleness is weird, but awesome at the same time. The name already gives this one away. You can't have a name like Putrid Corpse and not have it be on this list. And skeletons are already pretty weird, especially when they are moving about and being cognitive. But these creatures seem like they haven't quite completed the decomposing process yet, so they still have a little bit of muscle and connective tissue still attached to those bones, which in our opinion makes it a bit weirder than just seeing a bare bone skeleton. Plus, like we said earlier, with a name like Putrid Corpse, you already know that if you're running a melee build, that your nostrils are going to be the real thing in danger here. These creatures can be located around the minor Erdtrees, which they are there to protect. Which also makes sense considering one of the first things you'll notice about this creature is the tree that is growing out of the spinal column of this creature. This tree-like growth seems to give them the ability to create some kind of poisonous cloud around them. It also seems like it gives them pretty bad posture, but we're sure that's the last thing they are worried about. Quite possibly the creepiest and most ominous looking creature on this list. A creature that's body is not very proportionate. From the neck down, it's not too strange, by Elden Ring standards anyways, with slender legs and a slender body that is covered by a cloth lined with tassels. But from the neck up, there is nothing normal about it. A long neck with a mouth that is covered in what is presumably worms, considering it is called Wormface. The way they sway and dangle as this creature attacks you is animated incredibly well, but really makes you tense up when you're fighting it. Then for the piece de resistance, for lack of a better way to describe it, it's throw-up attack. Opening up around those worms and having bubbling black bile hurled at you is more than enough to make this list. Normally, when someone or something is blowing bubbles at you, you have nothing to worry about. But in Elden Ring, oh no. These bubbles were made to kill. The Oracle Envoy itself looks very strange, almost snowman-like, with a very round, rotund base and long, skinny arms attached to it. Then with a very tiny head that is encompassed in a large group of bandages or cloth. Then the weapon the Envoy uses, the Envoy's longhorn, looks like a much more complicated vuvuzela, with one mouthpiece but multiple different exits that are all twisted around each other so that multiple murderous bubbles can be sent your way. These creatures definitely have a very unsettling appearance, being hunched over, crawling on all fours or on all eights with the amount of limbs they have, and being almost entirely covered in their ritualistic-like attire. You can see why they are on this list. When you're around these enemies and you hear a bell ringing, you'll want to keep your head on a swivel. This bell summons some kind of slow-moving, yellowish projectile that is fairly easy to handle if you're only avoiding one, but if there are multiple projectiles coming your way, it can be a bit tougher to handle. One of the worst parts about the Wraith Callers is that if you are around them, then a revenant is bound to appear at some point, since these creatures worship and follow the revenants. There really isn't too much to say about these creatures other than they are just strange. So very strange. Other than looking like the Elden Ring equivalent of Onyx from Pokemon, their outward appearance isn't all that wild. They do have one singular eye, which is where that purple light that you see from these creatures protrudes from. Most of the time, these creatures are just minding their own business, undulating across the lands between, similar to how a caterpillar moves, or just standing straight up and doing whatever it is that they do. If you do end up too close to them, they will use self-destruct, and they do have another attack that is similar to how a slinky would fall down the stairs, end over end. These creatures aren't very dangerous, but they are definitely mysterious. You might think these bolus-covered small hands aren't anything to worry about, and you're right, they're very easy to take out, but these creatures come in two sizes, and when the older siblings show up, it is terrifying. A hand that has an excessive amount of fingers attached to it that looks as if it is severed from a creature that we'd rather not see the rest of. Oh yeah, it also has an attack where it legitimately almost gives you the middle finger, and that's kind of rude, man. When you see the name Giant Crow, you might think it's just a simple bird that happens to be larger than normal, but not in Elden Ring. Here that crow is a giant rotting bird that has a giant beak full of razor-sharp teeth that just wants to tear you apart to feed to their young. These birds do not miss leg day, and it definitely shows. This creature has white growths covering its entire body and has its own tentacles wrapped around itself. The only two tentacles that aren't wrapped around its body are used to pull this creature through the lands between and flail about to inflict damage on you. Its head is also weird, mainly because when we think of an octopus, we don't think of it having any kind of skeletal structure, but this giant land octopus has a skull that almost resembles a vulture, which is weird indeed. These wooden-like tank enemies have a giant face attached to them that is supposed to resemble the fire giant. And since it resembles the fire giant, it only makes sense that it would toss flames at you out of the mouth of this vehicle. One interesting fact is that these vehicles do in fact have a driver that is located on the backside of this chariot. These dogs are in desperate need of some kind of obedience training. Malnourished and incredibly angry, these creatures can ruin your day fast, with a mouthful of teeth that are in desperate need of a toothbrush, which, if you're Bobby Boucher, would explain why they are so angry in the first place. Their hollow eyes and patchy fur are exactly what you'd expect a dog to look like in Elden Ring. Could you imagine the mouth-watering dinners you could have after defeating this enemy? If we lived in the lands between, we would live off of nothing but giant lobster tail. Of course, it would need a good cleaning because apparently nothing in Elden Ring seems to be clean, but other than becoming the Elden Lord, that would be about as close as possible to our Tarnished getting to live the good life. These crustaceans look almost identical to the real-world counterpart, which we believe look kind of weird to begin with. But because it is Elden Ring, they had to supersize things a little bit. You have probably ridden past these stationary creatures countless times during your exploration of the lands between. Maybe smacked one a time or two just to see what it does. And truthfully, it doesn't do much other than spew a poison gas out, which, if you're not aware of that, can catch you off guard. The way they look is strange though, almost having scales covering it, which is why the first time we stumbled upon this creature, we thought it was some kind of dragon egg. And then we subsequently died to poison. So there you have it, some of the weirdest mobs in Elden Ring. If there's any mobs that you thought should have been on this list that weren't, make sure to let us know down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this and would like to see a part 2, because there are a lot of weird creatures in Elden Ring, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for future videos, and we'll see you in the next one.